Welcome everybody to the football experience. Caleb and I are back for another episode. We only did one last week, but it is what it is. I can't remember why we only did one.
Yeah, the football wasn't that interesting. We'll go with that.
There was midweek Carabao Cup,
Oh my
but
God, Carabao Cup. No wonder we only did one. Nah,
wait,
there was some games over Europe that were a little bit
yeah,
fascinating,
but
but yeah.
wait, you know what's absolutely like I can't believe like this was actually a thing, but like for the Arsenal Brighton game, it wasn't televised anywhere. Like apparently, like Sky has the rights to the Carabao Cup. They decided not to televise that game, so like no one could broadcast that game.
Arsenal
I
TV
think
would have had it, wouldn't they?
no. I think the only way you could have only broadcast, I think, the commentary if you're an Arsenal member and like through their website. That's or maybe even Brighton, like maybe they had commentary as well. But that's the only way you couldn't even watch it. You could have only listened to it. Um, but I think obviously because of like copyright and everything, like Arsenal Fan TV couldn't even broadcast that. But like, how the hell do you not broadcast like Arsenal Brighton? Like, it's not like it's Arsenal versus I don't know who's like in like the second or third division. I don't know, like Luton or something. I don't know. Like how I don't get that. Like two Premier League clubs and you don't broadcast it.
Well, for your sake, it's good that they didn't broadcast it because you would have wasted 2 hours of your life watching it.
Yeah, but still, like
I get, no, I get you.
I'll decide.
It's a weird one not to have on for
Yeah, but
sure.
like after the week, like I told you how I've been having a pretty crappy like I guess like week, like going from last week into this week, and like that like when I found that out, I was like, oh yes, like Arsenal's playing tonight. I'm gonna watch some nice football. And then after that, I think Chelsea versus Man City. I'm gonna watch that afterwards without knowing the result. And then it wasn't televised anyway. Like it wasn't anywhere on the subscription service I had. And then I went to a dodgy website and see if I could maybe like find a stream of it. Um, and then like I just saw in the comments, and then I also saw on Arsenal Fan TV they were saying like it's not televised anyway. Like I don't
Should have watched European football, man. What are you doing watching the Carabao Cup anyway? It's a joke.
yeah, but it's pretty much like all like Premier League teams anyway. So yeah.
uh,
Anyway,
anyway.
I told that's mine. That's like I guess my rant in a nutshell, I suppose. But I guess like before we went live, I said that I was going to let you basically take us in whatever direction you wanted to take us. So
Yeah. First of
lead the
all,
way.
I'll get my rant, not rant, but the opposite of a rant. A bit of praise out of the way, and I'll say thanks to my brother for picking me up a gaming mic that upon opening the box this morning at 6:30 this morning because I hadn't set it up yet. I saw all these bits and stuff that I had to start setting up, and I'm like, it's too early for this. So next time I'll do it the day before, and hopefully we'll have some better audio for me, and we'll have me with a proper setup with a mic and everything. So, but for this morning, sorry to my brother, sorry Dom, didn't set it up this morning, but for the next pod, I'll make sure we got that going for the listeners and
Have
for
you
Dom.
have you have you got like the box and everything? You should have taped a little unboxing. We could have put that up on.
Here, got the box right here. It's got so many bits and bobs in there.
Oh, it's like the whole setup, like the arm and everything as
Whole
well, so
setup.
you
It's
can
got a
move it
clamp that you
around.
put to the table.
Damn.
It's
Oh,
everything.
well,
Um,
let's yeah, we'll get some slightly better audio then from your end.
yeah,
Hope
I know.
everything
I don't know
is
if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we'll see.
Oh, I'm sure it's a good thing hearing your lovely voice and
Oh my
crystal
god, thank you,
clear
man.
HD audio.
Your grumpiness doesn't
But
get in the way of the compliments.
true. Well, you haven't caused the grumpiness, but I did want to mention we are not sponsored by whatever brand that of the box or the mic or whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, so but if we go into what we're doing today, I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to do two things that would basically put a bow on what we've seen. It's not even a halfway point, but the first, just over a third, I guess, of all the European seasons going into an unprecedented World Cup break. And then from the next pod on, we'll probably just focus on mainly World Cup stuff. There might be some club stuff that comes up that we'll touch upon. But yeah, just to put a bow on what we've seen in the club game, I thought let's do a check-in with the first, second, and third teams. I've done that, and so you could just go through it, tell me what you think of what we got. Obviously, I won't go into as much depth as I would for an end-of-season one because clearly we haven't seen as much football either. And then we'll revisit in the second bit of the pod, we'll just revisit that question we asked a couple of weeks ago about who the best teams in Europe this season are. We'll take a more holistic approach rather than just to watch or anything like that. And that will give us an opportunity to talk about what we've seen so far in the season, interesting storylines, interesting development with clubs, and just it'll be interesting just in and amongst itself, just to see how it's changed in the last couple of weeks, because a few teams have hit form, a few teams have regressed. The arrow's pointing up for a few, the arrow's pointing down for a few. So let's see if that's changed anything in that list, and we'll properly rank it this time. Full disclosure, I've only got one team ranked at the moment, so we'll come to that when we do it. So I'll be working through it and talking through it with you to get to the final conclusion of who should be in that top 16. But yeah. So how does that sound, man?
Well, before we get into that, far out, man. You know how I said my week is just like shit the past like week and a half? I noticed that so that my microphone has like a button on it that apparently mutes the microphone, and like the button was like turning off and on, which means it's muted. So I don't know if the first 6 minutes of this people heard me.
I heard you. So
yeah, so you heard me, but I don't know if the audio was coming through on the recording. So guys, if the audio changes, like I'll have to obviously do some editing. If the audio changes around like now when I've started talking, the audio quality gets better or worse. That's because I had to use your recording to get me into it. So bloody hell, man! Like, oh, my week. Anyway, go on, man. Go on.
where do you want me to start? Third or first team?
I think it's always best to go like third team, second, first. That way,
you love that option.
Yeah, like
that's good because there's
the first team's the main event.
There's a few questions in the third team. Okay, so in goal, I've gone for Nick Pope, who edged out keepers like Donnarumma and Thibaut Courtois. The pool for defenders and goalkeepers, as I did the shortlist, was not very deep. So the back fours for all these teams, and none of them play in a back five. But the back fours of goalkeepers were at least easy to come up with three who should be in the teams, and then you go on from there. I'm guessing that you probably already have, and I'm guessing there might be a theme as we go through the teams that you might have qualms with how few Arsenal players are in it. I think on count there'll be one that really surprises you when we get to the centre backs for this team. But I think I have three. I've got two for sure in, and then question marks over two more who are both in third team.
Wait, Arsenal players?
Arsenal players.
You only have two Arsenal players?
One in first team, one in second team. I'll get to why that is when we either talk about them or when we go through the clubs and who should be the best clubs and whatnot in the. Well, it's actually an easy explanation. They're not in the Champions League, so it's harder to assess them on the biggest stage. And also, we'll get to the front three as well when we talk about them, but the numbers for the front three don't compare to the guys who did make it. So, look, that could change, but at the moment, they've been flying. and they'll be high on the list of clubs. But for players in the first team, I don't know. I don't know if there can be too many complaints about who is in there, though. So Nick Pope, and then rounding out the Newcastle players in the third team is Kieran Trippier. I thought that was a no-brainer. The right backs were really easy to come up with 3. It was just where to put them. Now, centre back is the first question for this third team, and I'll need help deciphering who we think it should be. Centre back, the pool was so shallow, but the 3 that I came up with for third team who are battling it out for the last spot, I have Thiago Silva. Chelsea's form is terrible, but I think he's been a shining light for Chelsea this season. I have Lissandro Martinez, who will pop criticism after the first 2 weeks. I think he's been fantastic. And I have Gabriel as one of the 3 choices, because as much as I criticise him, and I think he should be third choice if you want to win big things, I think ever since he made, a few mistakes a few weeks ago, I think his form's been fantastic.
Yeah.
Another really good performance against Wolves on the weekend. And there was one game, I think it was the Leeds game, where it was pretty immense in the second half, where you guys were under siege as well. So I think he's been really good this season. I think he deserves, especially given how shallow the pool is at centre-back as well, when you've lost. I didn't have a Ruben Diaz on the short list. I didn't have a Virgil van Dijk, obviously, in the short list. So we've lost 2 out-and-out world-class centre-backs who I expect in the second half of the season or after the World Cup might do more for their cases. But these are the 3 I have right now. If I had to say who I'm erring on, it'd probably be Martinez and Gabriel, which is a bit weird because it's a double left-footed centre-back combination. But if I'm leaning one way or the other, just because of Chelsea's form, really, although they did finish top of their Champions League group, which is a decent feat in itself. But yeah, I think I'll lean towards Martinez and Gabriel, and I'm interested to get your view on comparing and contrasting those 3.
So that's the thing. Like, if you want to go for, I guess, someone who's like you said, Thiago Silva's been steady the entire season, and he's been like the one shining light for Chelsea's horrendous. Would you say horrendous season so far, or like bordering on horrendous?
It would have been if they had a worse Champions League campaign, but they're still only a point behind Liverpool, who are, what was it?
Wait, they dropped behind Liverpool now.
Yeah, they're like mid-table now. Chelsea are where we've been the whole season because of their losses. But yeah, that Champions League campaign is if we're talking about Thiago Silva as the player shining light, the finishing top of that group is the club shining light for so far.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, it's sort of like that argument, like like an NBA, the MVP argument. It's like, well, to be the MVP, like you can be an MVP, but like your team can like finish like 10th or something, or like not qualify. But like if you're scoring like 30 points, 35 points a game, you're obviously the most valuable player in that team, and you're the one that's actually like keeping them in contention or keeping them alive. But the MVP generally goes towards someone who's doing that in a higher ranked team. So, which I don't know, it depends what you put more credence on. Like, do you put more credence on someone who's performing in a shit team, or do you just give it to someone who's obviously excelling in a really good team? So he's the shining light of a really good team, and the performances of the team back up the performances of the individual as well. But like I can attest, like I told you how my game went on Sunday. It's like, well, one player. I'm not saying that I'm a shining light in my team, but like one player can't have an influence like against 11 players. Like maybe in indoor or like futsal, one player can absolutely like destroy the whole team. But it like and that's the thing. Like as good as Thiago Silva has been, if everyone around him, like pretty much all 10 players around him, are poor, there's not much else he can do. Like, so I don't know. Like I'd probably give him the edge just because of those reasons. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
If you were to give him the edge, though, who are you giving in the edge over? Is it a Lissandro Martinez or is it Gabriel?
See, that's the thing. Like Martinez was poor when he had a poor partner, and he's been good when he had Varane next to him. I haven't seen him. To be honest, I haven't watched the games with Lindelof since Varane's been injured. So, but like they lost to Aston Villa. Then they copped another 2 goals against Aston Villa, even though they won 4-2. But midweek and then they just managed to win against Fulham as well. I didn't watch the game. Whereas Gabriel, yes, he's had a constant in Saliba, but even last season you could see that he was a pretty decent defender. So like his performance has been like pretty much the same and consistent throughout. He obviously did have that dip around the Liverpool performance where I think like either side of the Liverpool performance he was sort of like I think the Tottenham was before that, and then the week after it was Leeds, if I'm not mistaken. And like there was and he made a mistake in every one of those 3 games. But since the Leeds game, even though we did draw to Southampton, I don't think we drew because it was his fault. So like he's been really good ever since the Leeds game. Like he hasn't been that sort of defender that I said a couple of weeks ago, where he likes to live life on the edge, sort of defender. So personally, I'd give it to Gabriel, and that's trying to remove as much bias as possible.
I actually think it's fair because, like I said, I'm leaning Martinez and Gabriel pretty much for those MVP reasons that you brought up, because it's hard because Chelsea finished top in their Champions League group, so that deserves some credence, but to see them going into the break in, I think it's 8th in the table, and really poor form, I don't know, it's hard to put much value on a player who's playing in a team that's stumbling like that, even though I think on an individual level he has been Chelsea's best player without Reece James in particular. Martinez has a bit of the combined argument because I think on an individual level he's been really good. I think he's still been pretty good even with Lindelof, to your point. But it's clear that partnership is not as good as Varane and Martinez. So Martinez, maybe even on an individual level, looks even better next to Lindelof because he has to do so much more work. And he's done it pretty well. But yeah, United is still a little bit stumbly. A win at Fulham is a pretty good win, to be fair, at Craven Cottage, the way they're playing this season. But yeah, I think we'll settle on the all left-footed partnership of Martinez and Gabriel.
Well, it is your team,
on an individual level, I probably would put Gabriel's case as the weakest out of those 3, but his team are top of the league and he's been a key part of that. So for me, that's enough to get you into the 3rd team. So yeah, we'll go with Martinez and Gabriel there. Continue with the left footers, obviously, because this is a left back. I've got Reynaldo, who, if we did this team a few weeks ago, would probably be a lot higher, but Atletico have stumbled. And much like the Thiago Silva case, he has been the shining light at left back. Now, left back, to be fair, was probably the deepest pool that we had in the defensive positions. Honourable mentions I got to give out would have been 2 in particular. Zinchenko, who maybe gets dinged a little bit for missing a few games.
Just a lot of games. I think he's only played like 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, that's the problem. But when he plays for you guys, I think the way he started the season as well, I think a lot of the way you guys can play now, particularly with containing, particularly with controlling possession in an opposition half, I obviously don't want to put it all down to him, but a lot of it is down to him, especially the inverted fullbacks as well, because he's an attacking midfielder playing a left back. I know the defensive things give us worries, and we talked about that in the game against United, but the way he plays in possession and high up the park, which you guys have been doing a lot this season, I think warrants him at least for a shout in one of these 3 teams. I just had him edged out. And another one is DiMarco from Inter Milan, who has had a good I think around that international break, he played really well for Italy, and then he's carried that form ever since. And it's funny because Inzaghi used to use him as sort of as a left centre back. He used him a lot there, and now that he's a left wing back, we can see a more creative role, and I think he's been one of Inter's best creators this season, along with the likes of Barella and probably Shannon Oglu as well. But he's picked up probably the slack that Dumfries has left, because Denzel Dumfries didn't even get into the shortlist to be the right back. So he's had a good season, but I think I've been so impressed with Reynaldo, his solidity, his defensive work. I think he's been fantastic on, yes, another stumbling team in Atletico who are not performing well, and that Champions League exit and not even making Europa League is an absolute debacle for them, and I think they're just clinging on to top four as we go into the break, but they're level on points with, I think, Athletic Bilbao, and they might be fifth, in fact. They might be behind Bilbao. Betis, I think they're level on points with, so they're embroiled in definitely a top four race. We'll see how they come back on the second half, but yeah, I've been super impressed with him to put him at left back. So now bring us on to the second question I have. And again, an Arsenal player is involved in the question, but it's for the holding midfield role. Honourable mentions to players like Casemiro, who I think started too late, Chouameni, who slotted into that Real Madrid midfield really nicely, and even someone like a Rodri, who didn't get into any of the teams. But I think that's a little bit, he's, like you said about Eddie Howe and talking about projecting him forward, I think that's a little bit, he's fallen victim to his own high standards in recent seasons. I don't think he's quite met them. And even Emmanuel Locatelli at Juve, who I think has been pivotal since he's come back as well, and Juve have turned things around. But the question I came up with for this spot is between two players, and obviously with your team being involved, one of them's Thomas Partey, and the other one is Bruno Guimaraes, who I think has been the jewel in Newcastle's crown this season.
Well, the question then is, who do you have in the second and first team then? If neither of those
Well, we'll get to that.
Because that's a really tough one, because both of those players should have been outstanding this season, and like especially for Partey, like you saw how much he was actually missing in the United game, which has been our only league loss of the season.
I had Thomas Partey as 24th in the top players of this season, so he made the top 25. At that stage, I didn't have Bruno Guimaraes, but Newcastle hadn't hit this purple patch of form that they've hit, and I think he might have had a few weeks injured in there at the start, so that sort of hampered him. But now that we've gotten to this halfway point and Newcastle are as good as they are, I think it's a question between those two.
Well, now I'm curious about you. Like I said, I'm curious about your first and second team. Who's playing defensive mid there? Because Partey needs to be in one of these three squads. Like, no question about that. And is Guimaraes really a holding mid?
Does that answer the question that you put Partey in over Bruno Guimaraes?
Well, is Guimaraes really a holding mid, or is he more like an 8?
Well, that's what he plays for Newcastle. He's definitely a bit freer. He's almost in that Brozovic role for Inter, who hasn't been playing this season, obviously, but without a 3 at the back. Whereas he's the holding, but he's a bit more free, because in terms of defensive work, you could probably say that Sean Longstaff gets through more defensive work, but he doesn't play as the central of those 3 midfielders. So you've almost got 3 central midfielders, although Joelinton is a bit freer to go forward. But on the team sheet, he still does play in this position.
Well, I think like I said, you can't not have Partey in one of these 3 teams. Like, especially considering Arsenal are top of the league, 5 points clear as well. The only 2 teams that they haven't, there's 5 teams that they haven't played, but the only 2 teams, I guess, in the top 4 that they haven't played has been Newcastle and City. And City they should have played if not for the whole Queen's death and the postponement of games and whatnot. But like I said, it would be a crime not to have Partey in one of these 3 teams. And that's no Arsenal bias at all. Like in that one, it's just
that one sounded a bit more. But at the same time, I think I'm going to agree, just because of, again, like the centre back argument, the team performance. I think he's been, well, I put him in the top 25. So I think he's been fantastic. Obviously, I think he's the most important player in terms of not getting injured because your replacement is so much less than him. But I must say, on an individual level, Bruno Guimaraes can do a lot more, and we've definitely seen glimpses. Well, we've seen more than glimpses of that this season because, like you say, is he really the holder? He's a hybrid because he creates so much for Newcastle. He's so important to creating chances, in particular for Almiron this season, and even Callum Wilson. But he also does his defensive work. So that's why it's a question, because at the end of the day, this is sort of an individual thing, but it's within a team context. I don't think the individual quality is so much better from Guimaraes over Partey that I can put him above a Thomas Partey, though. So I will go along with that and go with Thomas Partey as the selection, just narrowly edging out Bruno Guimaraes. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops if Newcastle can hold on to. Wow. Is it a top 4 challenge or is it a title challenge now? Which one is it? They've only lost one game all season and have the best defence in the league. So I don't know. We're pushing dangerously close into Newcastle pushing for the title, and contrary to like the Union Berlin story, Newcastle actually have genuine talent and quality in their team. So I don't know if this continues for a few games after the break, 5 or so. And like you say, the key point is Arsenal haven't played, and City and Newcastle haven't played Arsenal, but they haven't played each other yet. So we're going to have some tasty fixtures the other side of the break, which will be very fascinating to see. But ultimately, we'll go with Thomas Partey in that position. Now, coming to the central midfielders, and I lumped attacking midfielders into this because we see more and more midfields play with a 3, with one who has a bit more license, I guess, nowadays. So they're lumped into it. This position was deep. So for all the lack of quality and the lack of names on the shortlist we had in the defensive positions, the 2 central midfield positions for all 3 of these teams had a lot of good names in here. So I guess some honourable mentions. Sandro Tonali, I couldn't crack him into one of the 3 teams. I think he's been fantastic this season. Coop Miners from Atalanta, just because they've had a bit of a dip, but we'll get to see him for Holland in the World Cup, which will be good. Even a Jude Bellingham for club form can't get his way into one of these 3 teams, and probably the toughest one to leave out. And I've got Granit Xhaka and Joelinton as well, who get honourable mentions.
Damn.
Luka Modric, I don't think is. Huh?
Leaving Xhaka out, holy shit! Like
there's better. I know he's an absolute surprise, and it's an absolute surprise he's playing as well. But there's still better central midfielders in the world.
Yeah, but you could argue that he's been. You can argue that he's been one of our most important players.
Well, he's made a shortlist with all these names that I've just mentioned. So I mean, good on him, because we wouldn't have expected that at the start of the season. That's for sure. But I still couldn't give him a spot in one of these 3 teams because I still think I've seen better this season. But
anti-Xhaka
and the last, well, if I left Xhaka out and you think that might be a bit of a crime, then Leon Goretzka is the last one who I just couldn't get into a team, and that's probably because he started the season. He didn't start the season; he was injured, but he has been unreal since he came back for Bayern. So that's another thing why it's interesting to do these teams now, because. When we do them again at the end of the season, obviously we're going to have a World Cup, which is just come, but we'll also have the Champions League knockout stages, which will bump and elevate some players like a Karim Benzema, like the Ruben Diaz's that we talked about, like maybe if Liverpool go deeper, Virgil van Dijk, even a Leon Goretzka. So I expect these teams to change by the end of the season as we get to those important games, and also we get to the important business of who's in top 4 and who's winning titles. But yeah, they're the honour, and Leo Goretzka was one that I was surprised I couldn't get in, but I just couldn't in good faith get him in. So the 2 midfielders, central midfielders that I've gone for in the 3rd team are Rodrigo Bentancur, who I think has been immense for Tottenham, definitely their 2nd best player this season behind Harry Kane. Especially in recent weeks, we're actually seeing how much he means to the team's creativity and their drive from midfield, and he's scoring important goals now. And let's face it, Tottenham are still top four and still won their group in the Champions League. I know it was a powder puff group, and I know their form's taken a dip, but they're still performing to a level that is acceptable for them. And yeah, I think he's been fantastic. And the other one is Enzo Fernandez from Benfica, because I thought Benfica needed at least one player in one of these three teams for their unbeaten start to the season. I know it's the Portuguese league, but at the same time, they have played Porto in the Portuguese league, and Porto are a team who also finished top of their group in the Champions League. Again, a powder puff group. But Portugal has two representatives in the last 16 of the Champions League, so it's more than France. So it's not all powder puff. I know it's only the sixth best league in the world, but still, unbeaten start. I think 8 points clear over Porto at this stage of the season already. And most importantly, topped a group that included PSG. So there was no way I couldn't put a Benfica player in any of these three teams for what they've done at the start of this season. And Enzo Fernandez is the one I selected. Rafa Silva also made the shortlist for forwards. But yeah, the only one I could put in was Enzo Fernandez, and I think he's been fantastic. And I really hope he starts for Argentina at the World Cup.
Is there an honourable mention for Ødegaard as well? Or did he
Ødegaard made the shortlist, but didn't make any of the roles. But obviously, what he did on the weekend is a step in the right direction to maybe make it one of these three teams come the end of the season. Because I've been calling out for goals, but yeah, two of them on the weekend.
Yeah, good performance by him. But yeah, like I think it was on the last part of the second last one. I think I said, like I mentioned, that he sort of, at least what I've seen, he sort of goes missing in games. But it could also be the fact that because he is such a creative force in that midfield, maybe it's more the opposition team actually lining up to try and isolate the passing lanes to him, which obviously may look like he goes missing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely looks a bit of both, but he's been fantastic and definitely on the short list, which wasn't extensively long. But yeah, that's the midfield I had to go. I felt obliged to go with there. Any qualms apart from your Xhaka, obviously?
Yeah, like I don't know
Chanel and what behind it.
Like I know Bentancur is having more of an impact. Like I think he's probably having more of an impact for Tottenham, but like from the start of the season to now, Xhaka has been that one constant and consistent player for Arsenal. Actually, that pretty much the whole team's been constant and consistent.
Yeah,
but
that's the thing as well.
But I think because he's also excelling in expectations of him because he's playing in a different role. But he's also then popping up with goals and assists. The only thing is those goals and assists may not necessarily be important goals and assists, whereas Bentancur is coming up with equalizers and winners. So it's having a different sort of impact. Whereas I think like Xhaka's is probably like the second goal to make it a 2-goal lead, or the third goal in the Tottenham game, I think, to make it 3-1. So yeah, but then again, like yeah, his performances for Arsenal this season have he's a completely different player. And then also like you look at the Chelsea game, I think the 80th minute or whatever, where there was that scuffle in the corner. Like Xhaka last season or 2 seasons ago, he probably would have headbutted Kovacic. But now he kept his cool, or like he would have put his arms around his throat, but he kept his cool. He didn't even get a yellow card for that scuffle, which was pretty surprising. But yeah, like would he be, I guess, the third choice between Bentancur and Fernandes then? Like if one of those players weren't in there, would then Xhaka be right there to take their spot? Or would there be another player ahead of him?
It would have been Goretzka. I think Goretzka was the closest, or a Tonali. Because to your point, I think you summed it up perfectly. I think Goretzka isn't in the same category. I just think he's a world-class central midfielder. When he plays, he's fantastic. Tonali is one who I think you can compare to Xhaka And I think to the Bentancur point, I think those players are carrying a bigger load than Xhaka. I think if Xhaka was one of Arsenal's best players this season, I don't think they'd be anywhere near where they are. Although, to your point as well, the other important point you made, we're all, look, I can't say we're all pleasantly surprised by it, but we are all surprised by Granit Xhaka becoming this very, very good central midfielder this season. I mean, if you were to tell me I'd be putting Granit Xhaka on my short list to make any of these three teams at the start of the season, I'd have laughed you out of the room because his level was nowhere near it from what we've seen at Arsenal in the recent seasons. And he was the guy who should be replaced at the start of the season. Yuri Tillemans, whoever it be, should be coming into his position. And so I think we're all riding this Granit Xhaka wave because we've been so surprised by it. But for me, when I look at it in a vacuum, in the cold light of day against these other performers, I just rate these other central midfielders and what they do a little bit higher, and the load that they're carrying just a little bit higher at this stage. Although there is an argument, because Arsenal are flying so much and because he's been a big part of that bumps it up. So it's what you prefer, it's what you like. I think this one comes down to eye test more than anything. And so I'd put Xhaka in the Joelinton bracket, who probably are just below the Goretzkas and maybe Tonali, just a little bit below.
You know what though? I'd personally have Guimaraes ahead of Bentancur.
That's a good shout as well.
I'll put Guimaraes in that 8 position.
Yeah, I'd still go Bentancur just because I think the load he's carried for Tottenham has been, and I've also got Pope and Trippier in that from Newcastle. So I feel that's another thing. I feel content that we've reflected on how good Newcastle's start has been.
Yeah,
but that's also a good shout. I think that's a good shout. If you were to put Guimaraes over Bentancur, I wouldn't be up and up.
Do you have one more Newcastle player in your 3 teams though? Because if you don't have one more, and
no, I don't have Almiron, man.
How do you not have Almiron?
Because he's in the Xhaka category. It's like, it's great that he's doing what he's doing, but there's better forwards.
It doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter. It's team of the season so far, and he's like excelling. So are you judging this based on like the last 3 or 4 or 2 seasons or whatever? Or are you basing this on the last 14, 15 games?
Just what we've seen this season.
Because in the last 14, 15 games, he's been an absolute standout across all the leagues.
And he made the shortlist, but he didn't make any of the teams because there's been better players so far this season.
I don't know about that. He's been exceptional.
So do you want to hear the front 3 for the third team then?
All right, let's see your front 3. Like who you put ahead of Almiron.
There is one conversation I'm willing to entertain, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the wingers, I have Fede Valverde, who made that I think he made the top 10.
Is he your left wing?
He's the right winger. And I have Kylian Mbappe on the left wing. And up front, the conversation I'm willing to entertain now, I have Harry Kane as the striker. But I'm willing to put Victor Osimhen in that conversation now after what we've seen from him, and since his return to injury, he has been fantastic. And also, upon looking at the stats for this season, and I know stats don't tell everything, but I was very surprised to see Harry Kane only had 1 Champions League goal and 1 assist in the Premier League. I would have expected his assist numbers to be very high. Yeah, that's a good call. And obviously, as well, Kulusevski, who still made the shortlist even though he's been injured for so long, he has been a breath of fresh air coming back into that Tottenham team because I guess I didn't really realise how important he was for Tottenham. But as soon as he comes back in, chiefly in that Liverpool game as well, when he came on as a sub, it was just like they looked like a different team. They were creating so much more with him in. So I guess it's still Harry Kane for me because the amount of goals, I think it's 12 in the league, the clinical nature of him, and although his assist numbers don't suggest that he's so pivotal to Tottenham's build-up play, I still just have him over Victor Osimhen, but Osimhen is challenging him hard now because I don't know what his stats are in the most recent games, but he's Serie A top scorer, and we all know he was injured for over a month with that I think, hamstring that he sustained against Liverpool. So for him to still be Serie A top scorer and to be banging him in the way he is, and obviously for Napoli to be flying, and him to be such a pivotal part of it in recent weeks, because in recent weeks they've also been missing Kvaratskhelia as well, who's been unbelievable in that front three. So yeah, Victor Osimhen has entered the chat, so to speak.
You know what,
I still just have Harry Kane.
Well, if you want to make this team, I guess, functional and play on like hypothetical tactics on how the team would function and work, if you were to like line this team up against another team, Kane probably fits it better because, you know, you got the Kane and Son partnership. How about the Kane and Mbappe partnership?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Whereas Osimhen is more, I'm guessing. Should I play spoiler? Should I play spoiler and guess who your second and first team strikers are?
Yeah, this one's easy. So go ahead.
Lewandowski and Haaland.
Yeah.
So, whereas Osimhen is probably more towards that sort of striker, where he's more inclined to finish rather than build up and set up players around him. Whereas Kane can do both.
And I'll give honourable mentions to the striker position because there's only obviously 3 spots on the 3 teams for strikers unless you want to play 2 up front, which I did toy with to get Osimhen in the team. But I think Lautaro Martinez at Inter has been fantastic. And obviously Gabriel Jesus is a bit hard done by to be in this position with that quality ahead of him, because I think in terms of signings, him and Zinchenko, we'll have this conversation later, but they've somewhat transform the team. I know it's not all them, but they are huge parts of it. And Gabriel Jesus, the new threat that he adds to the Arsenal lineup, and I say this every time, it's not in terms of necessarily his goal scoring, but it's the pressure he puts on the heart of a defence, either in possession or out of possession, has just transformed the way this Arsenal team looks. Because for them to be playing the containing and high territory football that they play, there needs to be 2 things. There needs to be a really good structure behind the ball, which Zinchenko has been huge in helping provide, and obviously Thomas Partey as well, and Ben White. But there needs to be pressure on the ball as well. And Gabriel Jesus has been immense in leading the press from the front, along with those other 2 guys in Saka and Martinelli, who obviously get honourable mentions for the other spots, but I think the way Fede Valverde has helped carry Real Madrid without Benzema in the start of the season has been unbelievable.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you hinting that you don't have either Saka or Martinelli in either of these 3 teams?
I don't have them. There's better forwards in Europe, man. There's better forwards in Europe, man.
Jeez. You don't have all wingers. Like, you don't have either of them.
There's better in Europe.
You don't have Martinelli.
No.
Jeez.
How many goals has he scored this season?
It doesn't matter. Look at the pressure that he applies and the pressure that he takes off.
I know it's Ligue 1, but he's got, 4 goals this season, 5 goals this season? Kylian Mbappe at this stage is already on 12 goals, and he's having a bad season. It's not a contest for me. It's just not. But there's an honourable mention for them. They've been fantastic in the system that Arsenal have created, but they're not first 3 teams.
To not, like... If you had to, like, for me, if you had to pick between Martinelli and Saka, I'd pick Martinelli. So to not have him is, I think, is criminal.
Nah, if you listen to the names, we've got Mbappe's the name on the 3rd team. Just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's the 3rd team wrapped up here. So are we ready for 2nd team amongst your outrage?
I don't know if I want to go on with this anymore.
Well, spoiler as well, Leo Messi didn't make, so he gets an honourable mention as well.
Ronaldo, did Ronaldo make it?
Ronaldo? I don't think so. We talk about original Ronaldo. He has a better chance of making it.
Oh, jeez.
All right. That's fun, or despair for you in your case. 2nd team. In goal, I have Alex Merritt from Napoli. I think he's been unreal, and it's no surprise that you're going to hear a lot of Napoli players over the next 2 teams. So he gets the nod in goal. Right back, I'll make you a little bit more happy now. I got Ben White as my 2nd team right back. I think the way he's transitioned to that position has been fantastic. And like I said, he's one of those pieces who has been so important in that shape that you guys have in containing teams deep in their half.
And he actually overlaps as well. Like,
yeah, he does everything. He can control the play because he's good on the ball as well. He doesn't overlap frequently, but when he does, he can.
yeah, and like I think he has like 2 or 3 assists as well. Like,
yeah, I expect to see that come into his game more and more as he becomes more comfortable playing as an out-and-out right back as well. So there's room for improvement there as well, which is great news for an Arsenal fan because he is already second team at this stage. The centre-back partnership, I have Marquinhos and David Alaba. I know Alaba's been a little bit injured in the middle there, but when he's played, he's been unreal, I think, for Real Madrid. He was a question mark over whether he would make first team, but he just didn't get the nod. Left back, I got Alphonso Davies, who is still one of the most exciting left backs in the world.
he's still now sort of coming back from injury because didn't he have all of last season off?
Yeah, he was very in and out, or pretty much had all of last season off.
Yeah.
But he started from the start of this season, and he looked lightning. Even though Bayern had that little blip in the middle there, he was still pretty exceptional. I don't know if he got injured in recent weeks because I haven't seen as much of him, but yeah, I know his form up until that point was fantastic. So here's the answer to one of your questions so far for holding midfielder. My second team holding midfielder is Joshua Kimmich, who I think has just been as steady as ever for Bayern, a Bayern team that are now rampant. And Bayern's big case is, I know we've been shitting on the Bundesliga a lot this season, but their big case is they finished top with 6 wins out of 6 in a group that contained Barcelona and Inter. So that's no mean feat at all.
Yeah.
And he's been fantastic for Bayern in that midfield. And let's not forget, this is a player who I still think, my eyes still prefer to watch him at right back. So for him to still be in the second team as a holding midfielder shows you what kind of quality we have for this guy. And Germany, on a side note, and we'll talk about this more, but Germany will be feeling pretty good about their central midfielders going into this World Cup. Because on the other on one side of him, I have Jamal Musiala, who I think is already at 9 goals in the Bundesliga this season. I think for me, he's probably the jewel in Bayern's crown. Whenever Bayern play, they look so much better for having him in the team. He's so energetic. He's adding goals, as I said. He's getting those assists, taking up great positions, and he's 19 years old. Oh, my God. What a player we have there. And on the other side of him, I have Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, who he does everything. When you watch him, he's the fulcrum of that Lazio team. It's still staggering that he still plays at Lazio. But up until, the weekend that just was with Lazio losing 3-0 away at Juve, but Lazio were flying high up until that point. I think they're still in 4th in Serie A, so which is probably they would have been happy with that going into the break, but especially because Ciro Immobile has been out for a while, this guy has had to carry a huge load, as he always does anyway. But without his Lazio's second best player in the team, the load has increased, and he's dealt with it, and he's going to be one that hopefully isn't too worn out for the World Cup, because I think you and me both have high hopes. Well, you don't have high hopes for the team, but we expect to see them play quite well, Serbia, with the talent that they have. And yeah, I think he's been fantastic as ever. And the front three, this player's made maybe a late push, but he's been unreal. Reigning German Footballer of the Year, Christopher Nkunku, has been unbelievable. Already up to 12 goals this season. He's not an out-and-out striker.
You have him on the right?
I have him on the right, yeah. But yeah, he's been crazily good. Lewandowski, as we've already said, I think 13 in 14 in La Liga. And the main man for Barcelona, and it's a Barcelona team who go into the World Cup break as top of the league as well. And his argument for the first team is probably scuppered by the fact that he gets sent off in the week or in the midweek against Osasuna, but Barcelona still managed to win that game somehow. and they go in top. And then on the left wing, I have to have Neymar, because Neymar, I think, is second in goals in Liga and first in assists. He is in unbelievable form going into the World Cup, and probably the only reason he doesn't get a first team spot is because PSG failed to qualify top of their Champions League group. And it's hard to... I know he's got an unbelievable amount of goals and assists this season, but again, it's in Liga, and so the competition is just a bit less, and that sort of hampers his case a little bit. But my God, he's been unbelievable going into this World Cup, and he looks... We fancy Brazil a lot, but he looks set to be the main man on maybe the best team in the World Cup. So that's exciting for any Neymar fans and exciting for any followers of his legacy. But yeah, just in the second team for me. So that's my second team. I'm interested to maybe get your thoughts, or if you want, I can just rush into the first team.
I've already given my objections
Your
to
outrage.
my outrage to not having either Martinelli or Saka, and considering you've already...
Who did he displace in the second team?
In Nkunku?
Nkunku and Neymar.
I reckon Martinelli.
Nkunku?
Yeah.
Nkunku is on 12 goals in the league already.
And
RB Leipzig are up to third. And I expect that to be second. And they've had to swap managers in this season.
yeah,
He has been unbelievable.
Look, I haven't...
through the group in the Champions League.
Look, to be fair, I haven't watched much of Leipzig, but I've seen a lot of Arsenal, like enough to say that the eye test should prove that Martin, and even though he doesn't, I think he has 5 or 6 goals and around the same amount of assists. For him to miss out on all 3 teams, it's like I said, it's criminal.
You need numbers if you're playing in a forward position to
Yeah,
get
but
these teams.
the thing is,
because the margins are so fine.
But he
We're
provides
talking
so
about
much
the top of
more.
the
He
top.
provides so much more than numbers as well.
No, it is. I agree, but he's part of a scary front three. He's not like a singular guy. I think Nkunku's more singular as well. I think they got some decent players at RB, but this guy is the jewel without a doubt. Nah, we're not gonna see eye to eye on this one. There's no way Saka or Martinelli can usurp anyone I have in the 6. You can maybe... I'll give you an argument of Martinelli v Valverde. That's the only argument I'll give you. He's not better than Neymar. He's not better than Nkunku, and he's not better than Mbappe this season alone. And Valverde's been fantastic.
We will. Valverde has been fantastic, but we'll agree to disagree. Or we'll disagree to agree.
Anything else you see in that second team that catches your attention?
I don't know. Kimmich playing defensive mid is a little bit weird. He seems a little bit lightweight to be a singular holding mid. If you want to, I guess, make an argument that this team also needs to be functional as well.
Well, I think Sergei can help him because he's a man mountain as well. Milinkovic-Savic.
Yeah, or unless you put...
and to be fair, Kimmich is the holding midfielder for Bayern because Goretzka's more of the up-and-down guy.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's probably the only argument in terms of functionality. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head if there's any players really that... I don't know. It's surprising that there's no Man City players anywhere in the second team or the third team. That's another one as well. Because, you're missing unless Foden and Bernardo Silva made the first team.
No. Bernardo Silva is hampered because he's played a lot of wing this season. And while he's a really good winger, that central midfield position he played last season, he was unbelievable. And I really want to see him play there again.
Well, also, I know Cancelo got that red card against... Who was it against? Fulham, and he also got out-muscled by Salah for that winning goal. But I'm guessing you're putting Theo Hernandez in the first team, just because you got a bit of a hard on for him.
You also always forget that I have Cancelo as a right back when I go into these things.
Yeah, but there hasn't been any better right backs in any other teams, and he hasn't been playing right back.
Not necessarily. He's been playing a little bit of right back.
And when he did play right back, he was very poor compared to when he plays left back.
Well, that's the bigger point. I just don't think he's been up to his level. I expect him to make a run second half of the season because I put him as a world-class fullback. But what we've seen at the start of the season, I don't think it justifies him over Kieran Trippier or Ben White.
Well, I don't think it does either. But then he's been playing in the majority of the games. He's played left back.
Okay, but I know you probably haven't seen much of either of the players, but Alphonso Davies and Reynaldo have been. I don't think it justifies him being in over them either. I do, like I said, I do expect him to make a run second half of the season, as I expect a lot of City players. But are
you also marking Cancelo down for the fact that he plays for City and City are expected to be? I just don't think he's been at the level of Alphonso Davies and Ronaldo this season. He's not far off, but he's been making a lot of mistakes, like you've just outlined, crucial mistakes as well. And I don't think he's provided enough going forward to justify those mistakes, even though he's, like I said, I put him in the world-class bracket, so I expect that to change. But, yeah, I don't think his form's been very good at the start of this season. What about Gundogan?
Gundogan made the shortlist, but he wasn't really in solid contention for one of those central midfield roles.
You can have a fully German midfield for that second team.
You could have 4 really good German midfielders as well, because if you want to play a diamond, you can go Kimmich, Goretzka, Musiala, Gundogan.
Yeah, but how do you leave Savic out?
No, you can't. I love Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, man. He's so good. Yeah. Do you have anything else on the second team?
Nothing really on the second team. I think it's hard to really take out any. Yeah, it's hard to really make any changes to any of those positions.
Okay, so what I'm interested in now, I want to see how many of the first team you can guess.
Goalkeeper. Who's been the standout goalkeeper across the leagues? Because
do you want to start with the ones that you know?
Yeah. I reckon Kim as a centre back from Napoli.
Yep, you got one.
I'm guessing you have De Bruyne in there. Like that's another one that's criminal to not have. Theo Hernandez.
Yep, you got 3.
You pretty much just hinted that you don't have Cancelo at right back.
No, I don't.
Now, who's been a better right back than White and Trippier? Is it Di Lorenzo?
Yep, Di Lorenzo. You got another one.
You got Haaland as the forward.
Yep, Haaland as the forward.
You have to have Foden in there. Or did you hint that you don't have him?
No, you don't. And I don't.
Really? Jeez, how do you not have Foden? Left and right mid. Who would... Oh, wing. I'm guessing it's some Napoli players there, but I can't think of their names.
Oh, you know. Well, yeah, he's a hard name to pronounce, that's for sure.
Oh, Kvaratskhelia?
Yeah, I got Kvaratskhelia on the right.
How many have I guessed so far? 5?
You've got 1, 2, 3, 6.
6.
You've got a holding midfielder, central midfielder, left winger, and centre back and goalkeeper.
Wait, who was the holding midfielder that I mentioned? Because you're not putting De Bruyne out there.
No, De Bruyne is one of the central midfielders.
Yeah. And so I need another centre back. I need a goalkeeper.
This one I don't think you'll get. I don't think you'll get holding midfielder.
But who would the goalkeeper be?
I don't know if you'll get... You should get centre back and you should get left wing. Centre back, you'll kick yourself when you don't get centre back.
What team?
Oh, come on, you know.
What, Napoli?
No. Napoli already have theirs. They have Kim. It's another top team, though. Another team who are top of their league.
You already got Marquinhos from PSG.
Yep, I do. He's the only no more PSG players in the first team.
Oh, Saliba.
Oh, yeah, Saliba. There we go.
I'm surprised he actually gave him credit.
Come on, man. Come on.
Right back. I don't know. Like there's
No, not right. Left wing or goalkeeper and a holding and a central midfielder.
I know.
Left wing, I'm surprised you haven't got because maybe he's gone off the boil a little bit in recent weeks, but he started the season
Vinicius.
like a house of. Yeah, Vinny, left wing.
Yeah, Vinny. Yeah, I don't know. That's what 8 then out of the 11.
Yeah, you got to 8. So the goalkeeper, I have Marc-Andre ter Stegen, who
really
have the best.
I
best
wouldn't have got that
defensive record. I think they've only conceded 5 goals all season, and if you look at the defense in front of him and how it's changed and how constant he's been, I think it's hard to go above him. To be quite honest, he's been fantastic. And the two remaining positions are both Napoli players, and I
did get Di Lorenzo right back.
Yeah, I have 5 I think Napoli players in the first team, which is incredible in itself. But the holding midfielder is the biggest. We've talked about Granit Xhaka and how surprising he's been this season. Stanislav Lobotka, for me, has been the best holding midfielder in Europe this season. I didn't even know who this guy was going into the season. And the same actually goes for Kvaratskhelia. I had no idea who he was going into the season. So we have 2 absolute unknowns for me going into the top team from what we've seen this season. But Lobotka has been unbelievable. He was already really good, but recent weeks he has almost taken his game to the next level. And if you look at the guy, you're like, what? Like, this guy will not be very good in holding midfield. He looks like a sort of round, short, little guy in that holding midfield. He's everywhere defensively, and his calmness on the ball is unbelievable. So, so press resistant. So, such a good player so far this season, and I had to put him over some of those big hitters that we mentioned for that role. But
wait, who was your right wing again?
Kvaratskhelia. I put him out on the right because I think he's transferable. So
then who are your 2 central mids then?
And so, yeah, we have Kevin De Bruyne on one side, and the other central midfielder, I have Frank Zambo Anguissa, who I think has been fantastic for Napoli again. Such a driving force, such a physical presence, such a calm influence as well. And this is light years away from the guy we saw at Fulham all those years ago in the Premier League, because, like I say, five Napoli players in the first team, and then Alex Merritt makes the second team, and Victor Osimhen is a real discussion to be making third team as well. So it's no surprise to say, and this will transition into the club discussion perfectly. But yeah, when we talk about the best clubs in Europe, it's no surprise to think that Napoli are probably the best club in Europe when you think of 5 players in that first team. I don't know how much needs to be said about the rest. Di Lorenzo, I'll give a quick mention because I just love the way he improves, much like Vinicius, actually. He just improves season on season, and he's almost like more developed Ben White for me. I think they have very similar characteristics. I think if you wanted to put Di Lorenzo as a third centre-back or even one of the 2, he's reliable enough to do that. But also Di Lorenzo is just a bit more developed because I think what he's done going forward this season, he's even added like underlapping runs to his game, and he's getting forward, putting lots of crosses in. So those 2, for me, are very similar right backs. Just one's just a little bit more progressive, and also one is captain of probably not even arguably, he's captain of so far the best team in Europe. So yeah, Di Lorenzo has impressed me to no end. Kim Min-jae, I think we've both been singing his praises this whole time. Saliba, same thing. Theo Hernandez is a little bit of a down season, but I mean, I just think he does so much for a left back. It's unbelievable. Every time I watch him, I'm like, I can't believe the positions this guy takes, the things this guy is trying to do and does. So to still be first team, even though he's having a bit of an off season, I know I I have a massive crush on Theo Hernandez, but he's also captain of that AC Milan team. So let's not forget that. And he's only 20. I think he's still 24 years old. So he's been fantastic. Kevin De Bruyne, we don't need to say much more. He's been unreal. Kvaratskhelia, we said it all at the start of the season, and even though he's been injured in recent weeks, he still makes this team because of the amount he creates for that Napoli team. And Haaland, what more can we say? Been an absolute beast, even though he's gone off the boil a little bit, but even off the boil is still scoring a penalty and still scoring goals. So apart from against Brentford, obviously.
Yeah.
Had to throw that one in there. But yeah, they're my three teams. Any last comments before we go on to the next subject? The clubs.
Still can't believe you don't have Martinelli and Saka. Martinelli or Saka.
I can't go into this again.
That's all I'll say on that.
Look, I will say that probably if you look up the numbers, they're somewhat comparable to Kvaratskhelia if you go for a Martinelli or a Saka. But I don't know. Look, to the point of the clubs as we transition, Arsenal, if they were in the Champions League and they got out of the group convincingly, then they would have a shout at, well, they probably would be the best club side in Europe because they play in a tougher league than Serie A. But Napoli, for me, from what we've seen so far, are undoubtedly number one because they can combine the two things. They've been dominant in their domestic league, not losing a single game, and I think they already have, an 8-point lead or something at the top already going into the break. And that's a league that it might not be the Premier League's quality, but it has a lot of good teams just underneath it. Definitely for me, the most entertaining league in Europe this season. And so Napoli get in as the undoubted top spot when I'm talking about clubs. And you look at how many players they have in first and second team. I know that's subjective, but I just don't think there can be an argument that any other club has outshone Napoli to this point of the season. And I'm interested to hear your take on that before we go into the other clubs that we want to mention.
I don't have many arguments with the whole Napoli contention. But like you said with the Italian league, I know that this year, like we have at this point in time, we have pretty much three teams competing for the. If you want to put Newcastle in there, just because they've started so well, we have three teams competing for the title. Because I think Newcastle are they're 2 points behind City, so they're 7 points behind Arsenal, if I'm not mistaken. So at this point, that's only two games, 3 games really that they need to win, and they're if Arsenal lose 3 games and Newcastle win 3 games, they go above Arsenal. So, but Italy though, you have I know that I haven't seen the table, because you said that at this point Napoli have an 8-point lead, but you have Napoli, Lazio, Roma, Juventus, Inter Milan, AC Milan. That's 6 teams that I just named there, and they're all to a certain degree title contenders, even though Atalanta as well. At this point, they're all, I guess, sort of title contenders, and any one of them can realistically win it. Whereas with the Premier League, at the start of the season at least, we're saying, it's pretty much City's to lose. Liverpool will probably challenge. Or it's Liverpool's to lose, really. It's between those two teams as 1 and 2. No one really expected things to go the way that they have so far. But yeah, in that sense, I guess it's more competitive. Whereas you look at also the French league or the German league, it's 2 teams really. Even though you have some teams that have started really well, so they're doing, I guess, what Brighton did. Brighton were top 4, the top 2, the first 4, 5, 6 games of the season, and then they've fallen off. I guess Potter leaving doesn't help the fact that they've fallen off. But they did the same thing last season, where I guess they were in that top 4, top 3 after 6, 7 games, and then they just fell off. And I guess that's sort of going to happen in the French and German leagues, and then obviously the Spanish league is Barcelona, Real Madrid, and then you have some teams that just start really well just because their fixtures might be favourable to them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about the competition in Serie A. And the interesting thing is, you talk about those teams who can realistically win the title or in a title challenge. Well, they all would be if it wasn't for this absolute juggernaut that Napoli are. And I just think it's going to take even an epic Napoli collapse to lose it from me, or it's going to take a lot of momentum being lost over this World Cup break, which is maybe a possibility as well.
Well, how many players do they have going?
If we go through, obviously, them being an Italian club and Italy not making it, so Di Lorenzo's not going.
Kim is South Korean,
Georgian.
right?
Yeah, Kim is going with South Korea. Lobotka is Slovakian, so I don't think they made it.
I don't think so.
And Gisa, I think, is Cameroonian. I think they made it, so he'll be going. And I think Alex Merritt is Italian as well, so I don't think he'll be going.
Osimhen
might need a factor. Osimhen's Nigerian, so I think they made it.
They made it. I'm pretty sure they made it.
Yeah. So they've got a few going, but even then, they've got players going who aren't expected to make deep runs in the tournament.
Yeah, they're just probably going to play 3 games and that's it.
Yeah, maybe 4 if they get out, but yeah, so they could get another preseason. They could come back sharper.
I think
which is scary as well.
I think I heard on TalkSport apparently. I don't know if I heard it right because I was concentrating on something else and I just sort of had it in the background. But I think there's going to be like one. You know how in preseason they had those tournaments, like 4 or 5 team tournaments. They're doing something like that in the Middle East. I'm not sure what country, but I think like Arsenal's there, City's there, Juventus is there, and I think AC Milan. I'm not sure what other team is there as well, but apparently that I need to confirm it like myself. But I heard something along those lines. So
yeah,
it's just preseason.
I was looking at some of the fixtures for some of the big clubs, just going backwards. But then when I went forwards, you see that like Inter are playing Barcelona or something in the middle of the World Cup. So I think there'll be a lot of friendlies organised between these teams. So yeah, like you say, a second preseason really. For players who aren't going?
Did you see that like League 2 or like National League team in I think it's like a local Manchester team. They sent a request to sign Haaland on a 28-day loan deal. Did you see that?
I didn't see that. That's good though.
Yeah, like it's hilarious. Obviously, the response is going to be no, but like, do you think something like that would have been approved like back in the maybe like the 50s or 60s when like players were on like £100 a week or something like that, where it wasn't like millions of pounds. Like Haaland's probably on like $1 million a month because De Bruyne is on what, 500,000 a week. So like, do you think back then maybe they would have allowed it, or definitely not back then? Because back then like there was a lot of people chopping each other down.
Yeah, I have no idea. I reckon there's a better chance that it gets allowed, and it's one of those crazy stories that, like a side story in footballing history. That's just like, what the hell's happening? I was watching some like World Cup show, and like, do you know the story of like Pickles the dog finding the Jules Rimet trophy after it had been lost in the UK? It's just like, it would be one of those cool little side stories like about the World Cup, you know. But yeah, like I'm getting into World Cup mode now, so slowly but surely, we'll have all that to talk about next pod. But
yeah, next pod will be like World Cup specific.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think we can both agree that Napoli are sort of in a tier of their own as number one, and then we can go into the next tier I had, and this is where I don't have it ranked. So the only team I have ranked is Napoli.
You're ranking your teams right now. Are you doing what? How many teams are you ranking? Top 25, top 20?
My shortlist was 28, but we'll keep it to 16. But we'll go through just quickly about the cases that each team has, because there's like I came up with tiers in the end. So first tier is Napoli by themselves. Second tier I have Arsenal, PSG, Bayern, Man City, Real Madrid. Assess.
Hang on. Arsenal, Man City, Real Madrid, and PSG, you said?
Bayern and PSG.
Okay. Yeah, so like, did you say this live, or did you say this off air where you've marked Arsenal down just because they're playing in Europa League?
Yeah, I think you have to be. It's not marking down, but when you compare them to the other clubs, they have a stronger case because they play in the top competition. In Europe.
See,
it's not like taking away, but yeah.
Yeah, see, you know how like a couple of weeks ago I said that I think it was after the first Juve Benfica game. I said that Arsenal next season beats PSG. Now, if we're talking just like visually, like who plays the best football, it's probably like Napoli, Arsenal, Man City. City probably has gotten a little bit boring just because we're so used to it. But then if you compare Arsenal and City, they play a very similar style, but they're slightly different. I think because Arsenal is a little bit more direct than City. And they play with a little bit more higher tempo as well, from what I've noticed. So those three teams are probably the most exciting three teams in Europe. It would be then.
I'll give a shout out for Real Madrid and Bayern though. I think PSG are clear losers in the style category out of these teams. I think that can be said with pretty much certainty.
Yeah. See, like if Arsenal was to come up, like again, they will come up against Man City. I think that's like going to be the same as this year, where they play just after New Year's, if I'm not mistaken. Now, and I said, like, depending on how that game goes, I'll be able to give a definitive answer on whether like we are actual like title challengers rather than just like contenders. Because I believe there's a difference between the two. Challengers means that like you actually have a realistic chance of winning it, whereas contenders is just like, okay, you're putting pressure on the front runners. But like if Arsenal was to go head to head against any one of those teams, it would be a very good match. I'm not sure whether they'd be able to beat those teams. I believe that they could get a result against PSG just because PSG doesn't really have a strong midfield and their mentality is weak. It's weak. It's definitely weaker compared to Arsenal's. Arsenal's mentality has definitely changed this season compared to last season and even the previous seasons. But against like Napoli and Real Madrid and Bayern, that'd be definitely interesting, exciting games. I don't think it would be a blowout. I'm not sure whether we'd win those games. I think that'd be close. They'd be definitely closer this season compared to like last season or the season before. But I don't think if we were to play those teams 10 times, we'd probably only win 3, maybe draw 1 or 2, and then they win like 5 games. So they win the majority of the games.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if my understanding is right, if that's your main metric, are you bumping Arsenal to the bottom of this list out of these teams then in this tier?
Well, it depends how you're ranking it though, because
I know there's a lot to consider. So I think we need to as we go through each case, we need to bring up new things to consider.
Yeah.
See, another thing to consider is out of the list of the short list of 28 teams, how many times has a team that we're talking about beaten another team on that list?
Yeah,
so
because
Arsenal
they haven't
beaten.
Well, they've beaten Chelsea, they've beaten Tottenham, and they've beaten Liverpool.
So I had 10 nailed on certainties that will make a top 16. Arsenal, Man City, Newcastle, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Napoli, AC Milan, Bayern, PSG, Benfica. They're the 10 nailed on that I think will make a top 16 list. Now, Arsenal have beaten none of the 10, but they have beaten just below that Tottenham and Liverpool and Chelsea. So they've beaten the three of the teams who were fighting out for those last 6 spots. Well, they've also lost United out of that as well, but that one could have gone either way.
But, that was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, just because I think for 50 minutes we outplayed, actually outplayed, and to a certain degree dominated United. It's just that we got naive, I think. Anyway.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing.
But if you look at the other cases, PSG have beaten no one else on the list. They haven't beaten anyone who's a nailed on, or they haven't beaten anyone who's not a nailed on.
Well, they haven't even beaten Benfica.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So they haven't beaten any of those teams. Bayern have beaten Inter twice, and they've beaten Barca, who were a nailed on. Inter aren't a nailed on. And then they've also beaten only Freiburg, who Freiburg aren't going to make the top 16
nah.
anyway. But they needed a mention because they're second in the Bundesliga.
But they drew to Dortmund.
Yeah, and they drew to Dortmund. They drew to Union Berlin as well, who also needed a mention because of their start of the season. So, like, using a metric, it's not as cut and dry as you think about that. So, or using that metric, it's not as cut and dry as you think about who's beaten who on the list.
Yeah. If I was to go just purely on, like, entertaining football, like, what team would I want to go watch and, like, pay money to go and watch? Arsenal would be up high on that list. They'd probably be second behind Napoli.
See, and I could completely go along with that, putting them second. And on the same token, I could completely go along with putting them sixth and bottom of this tier. Just for the no Champions League thing and not being tested at that level.
Well,
so it's again, a really tough one.
Yeah, it depends. Like I said, it depends how you're ranking it. Like, are you ranking it on like the actual like I said like just a minute ago? Would you go and pay money to go and watch them play? So are you ranking it on aesthetics, or are you ranking it based on their performances, and then like how do you think then that they will do then against the other teams that they're up against? Because aesthetically, they're probably the second best team in all of Europe.
Yeah, I could go along with that. And also, are we ranking on how much quality they have in the team? And that's why I guess we started with the first, second, and third team, because then we could get a better idea of that. So I know you have your gripes with it, but I mean, but even PSG only have, 3 players who made the team. Bayern only have a similar amount. Real Madrid only have a similar. City. So Arsenal have just as many players in those 3 teams as those other teams as well. Just not Saliba made first team and White made second team. So I don't know. Arsenal have a pretty good. I'm tempted as we're talking it out. I'm tempted to put Arsenal as second, and I wasn't expecting to do that just for the lack of Champions League football.
Yeah.
But I guess Bayern had that blip as well in the middle. Real Madrid are having their blip now, and Real Madrid have a higher ceiling because they've been without Karim Benzema a lot of the start of this season, and let's not forget that guy's the Ballon d'Or winner. So to have him coming back into that team is pretty scary. PSG, we've been through them. It seems a lot this season. They also have a high ceiling because of those 3 guys, but they have a low basement because of those 3 guys and how they might come back from the World Cup. And Man City, I guess this goes into a little bit of a review, but man, I've soured on City a little bit in recent weeks. They don't look that great, do they?
They've sort of fallen off a little bit, haven't they?
Yeah, and the more I look at that defense, I don't know how that defense translates into big games and Champions League knockout stage games. I'm not filled with confidence with Akanji and Laporte and Ake having to play and Stones having to play right back and play big minutes. I'm not filled with confidence in that back 4. Whereas Arsenal, I have more confidence in an Arsenal back 4. PSG, I have more confidence in them. Bayern have a lot of the same problems as City, and even Real Madrid, I have more confidence in their back 4. So
it's
City I've soured on a little bit.
It's City's forward line and midfield that's, I guess, carrying that team, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's kind of a weird one to say because City have had fantastic defensive records in recent seasons, and they do it all as a team. There's probably a lot of things that go into it. Maybe one eye on the World Cup. We know they have the most players out of any squad going to the World Cup. It might be equal with Bayern. That could have something to do with, obviously, winning every trophy except for the Champions League in recent seasons. Hunger, that could have something to do with it. Age could have something to do with it, and squad makeup, particularly in that defense, for me, definitely has something to do with it. And going into a season without, you can say Cancelo's a left back, but for me, they went into the season without an out truly first team left back because they go in with Sergi Gomez.
But then they also lost Zinchenko and Jesus.
And here's the point. Here's the question: at what point do we lament and do we go in hard on Manchester City for firstly giving up their manager to Arsenal or their assistant manager, fine. He deserves an opportunity to go and manage at a big club. That's fine. But when do we lament them for giving them Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus, who have, for me, and I keep saying it, been a big part of completely turning that Arsenal form into a champion-looking side? When do we go in hard on them for doing that?
Well, firstly on the Arteta thing, like there's been a lot of stories that came out. I think like Arteta was the one that helped Sterling with like his finishing, because he became even though he scored 20 goals in that Suarez season, like I think he then went on to become an even better finisher at City, and I think he's helped a couple of other players as well, like in that like with the way that they play as well. And Guardiola's like sung his praises in terms of working one-on-one with certain players. So that is obviously a big loss in terms of like losing a key member of your backroom staff. But then like you said, like you can't keep these managers pinned down in these secondary roles, because like, you know, someone like for instance Mourinho, who was a translator, like what is he going to be a translator all his life? Brendan Rodgers as well, like he was Mourinho's second, wasn't he? And then like so there's certainly other managers as well that have been like second to either Guardiola or Klopp or Mourinho that have gone on to have their own careers. But then like this season, then I guess it's the first thing that comes to mind is what goes around comes around. Because when City were first starting with this Arabic money, Arsenal sold them Adebayor, sold them Clichy, sold them Sanya. Was there another player as well that we sold them? I think there might have been one more player that we sold them, but like we basically sold them like in the space of like 2 or 3 seasons. We sold them. I think we sold them at least 1 or 2 players every single season for those 2 or 3 seasons when they were building that team.
Yeah.
So now it's sort of like, you know, we took their assistant manager, we took their left back, albeit backup left back, and then we took their, I don't know, Jesus was a weird one. Like he wasn't really their main striker last season or even the season before that, but he was like, but then like he also played it out in the wing as well. So like he was sort of he wasn't like De Bruyne plays every single game. Like he only gets rested, I guess, for like maybe the early FA Round Cup games and the Carabao Cup games. But then other than that, he plays every single game. Whereas Jesus was sort of like playing almost every single game. He's probably playing maybe like 70 or 80% of the games, but he was, I guess, sort of on that rotation. But he was a main player of that rotation, if you get me. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like maybe we take one more player off their hands next season. But yeah, like those 2 players, like, and I think we spoke about it last week. They know how to win the Premier League. They know what it takes. And then bringing that mentality as well and that professionalism. And I'm sure City have like state-of-the-art technology within their training facilities and within their staff and everything. And they brought all that knowledge as well, like in terms of recovery and attitude. And they brought all that with them as well, that they've learnt from the City staff and whatnot. So, yeah, City... Especially, I think Pep. I think it's known that Pep showed his grievances, especially with Zinchenko. He didn't really mind the Jesus one too much, but there was Zinchenko one. I think he did mind that one, him being sold, and
so he should, because the lack of depth at left back for City, even in recent seasons, let alone this season, has been probably their weakest position, to be quite honest.
And then because like you have Cancelo filling in, and he's a right back. So
I brought you around. You just said he's a right back.
Well, that's his main position, I suppose. It's and the fact that then you have Walker, who's injured. So like you're missing Walker, and then Cancelo's been so fantastic on at left back that then he then has to transition back to right back, And because of that transitional sort of period, he sort of seems out of sorts because he hasn't played in that position for such a while. Because if you think about it, he's playing with a different person on that same side. So instead of playing with like Foden and Bernardo Silva or Gundogan on the left hand side, he's playing then with De Bruyne and Mahrez on the right hand side. So he needs to get that connection rolling, which takes time.
Definitely. So I think there'll be questions asked if this Arsenal title challenge continues about selling two key pieces to you wouldn't have thought a direct rival, but they've turned into a direct rival now. So that's one to watch second half of the season. But I think just to wrap up this little tier, I think I'd have to put Bayern as the second team. Just for the Champions League group stage performance, beating Barca home and away. I know that they were outplayed in the first half at the Allianz, but I don't know. You can take whatever narrative you want from that in terms of saying, well, that's the show of a great team that they can still win when they're not playing well. And to be fair to Bayern, when they click through the gears and that front four combine, they are very scary. So, and the way they've been rolling going into this World Cup break, I think I'll just edge them at second.
I can agree with that because if I think about head to head, if Arsenal is to come up against Bayern, over two legs, I don't think we win.
So, and then I'd have Arsenal third. Because we've been talking about City for so long and their negatives, I think it's impossible not to, and they're 5 points clear of them at the top of the league.
Yeah.
I think City still have to be fourth. Oh, City or Real Madrid? That's the question. And PSG will be last.
Well, how much are you punishing? Because Real Madrid did also have a loss. Was it last week in the league? But how much are you punishing City?
Their first loss of the season.
How much are you punishing City? Because the thing is that City have dropped off since over the past 2 or 3 weeks because Haaland had that slight injury.
It's not punishing. It's projecting. Because, like I said, Real Madrid have been without Karim Benzema for a big chunk of this season so far. And when they get him back, I think they will look a lot better. But I guess if we're just looking backwards, I'd still just put City above Real Madrid. So we'll go Man City fourth, and we'll go Real Madrid fifth. But that could flip when Karim Benzema comes back, I think. That's the second tier. And we're down to 6 teams so far. In a tier of their own, I had Benfica as the 7th best. Unbeaten all season. I know it's the Portuguese league, but I went through the merits of the Portuguese league before.
But then unbeaten in the Champions League.
In the Champions League, exactly. And topping a group that had PSG and Juventus and beating Juventus home and away.
And they smashed Juventus as well.
Exactly. So are you happy with that? Benfica in their own little tier? Well, below that.
Who are the other teams?
And I'll go through the other teams. So, and in a tier below that, I have 2 teams, Barcelona and AC Milan.
Yeah,
and then just below that, I have
both of them.
Exactly. So we got Benfica in at 7th. I think we can agree with that, and we've been impressed with what we've seen there.
So is PSG 6th?
PSG was 6th. They were bottom of the second tier.
Mm-hmm.
So Barcelona and AC Milan, let's have the discussion to see who. And then below that, I have Newcastle and Tottenham in their own sort of little tier. And then below that, I have Liverpool, Juventus, RB Leipzig, Inter, Chelsea, Man United, and Dortmund.
No Liverpool?
Pardon?
Did you say Liverpool in there or no?
Yeah, Liverpool were the first team I said in that tier. And then below that, we start getting into Betis, Roma, Lazio, Sociedad, and then below that you got Atalanta, Atletico, Lens, Freiburg, Union Berlin, and Athletic Bilbao.
We're going that far
Athletic
down.
Bilbao made our top 16 last time, but they've hit a bit of a rough.
Where are you putting Newcastle?
Newcastle, so we got Benfica 7th, then I've got Barca and AC in a tier just below that, then I've got Newcastle and Tottenham just below that. But I'm open for a discussion if you think that should be changed, what you've seen, all of that.
I reckon based on form, Newcastle could give either of those teams a run, especially AC.
And here's the problem. AC have gotten out of their Champions League group while Newcastle are not competing in Europe at all.
Yeah.
And see, I know that goes a little bit on talking about last season, why they're not there. But at the same time, we haven't got the opportunity to see them challenged on that stage, which is hampering when we're talking fine margins between elite clubs in Europe.
Yeah, and then it's interesting. Like I reckon AC probably beat Barca, but then I think Newcastle beat AC, but lose to Barca. Like just because of sort of style and personnel between the three teams.
Yeah, you've got like a weird three-way sort of dynamic going there.
Yeah, similar to I guess in boxing matches or MMA where certain fighters will beat one fighter, but then just because they beat one fighter doesn't necessarily mean they'll beat another one. Just because the styles are different.
So do you think that should be one big tier with Barcelona, AC, Newcastle and Tottenham? Or are you happy with Barca and AC and then Tottenham and Newcastle?
I think a three-team tier with Newcastle, AC and Barca, and then Tottenham just below that. Because Tottenham, I know in the past, 2 games, they've come back from behind or 3 games they've come back from behind to snatch wins. But they just, they don't play great football or attractive football or anything. It seems more like they're just riding their luck more than they're playing any sort of style or system. They're relying more on their individual players like Kane, Bentancur, Kulusevski in the recent 2 or 3 games to get them out of jail rather than playing a system. Because AC and Barca and Newcastle, they all play systems and the players are performing in that system. Whereas with Tottenham, Conte just seems like he's still trying to figure it out, still trying to get the best system with his players. I know he's had injuries and everything, but yeah, it just seems like they're riding their luck in more games than not.
Yeah, and to your point, Tottenham of this list have lost to Arsenal, have lost to Newcastle, have lost to Man United, have lost to Liverpool.
Yeah.
On the list. So, yeah, I actually, the saving grace for them is they still have Bentancur and Kane, who made my third team. I know other people might have it differently. I don't know if you can have Harry Kane anywhere different, to be fair, but so they still have the quality, and they also, I know it's a power buff group, but they still did qualify in the Champions League and qualified top. And the good thing is we get to see Tottenham play AC Milan after the World Cup as well.
Yeah, so we get to actually see that.
So that's a good thing.
But then that could also be a very different Tottenham because Son will be back, I'm assuming. Kulusevski will be at full fitness, I'm assuming as well. Wasn't Bentancur a little bit injured as well, 5 weeks ago? So he's sort of coming.
The only problem is if Uruguay go deep, then he'll be playing a lot of football at the World Cup as well. But I think I'm happy to put Tottenham in their own tier just below the other 3. So now the question is, how do we rank Barcelona, AC, and Newcastle, which will be 8, 9, and 10?
Probably AC, Barca, then Newcastle. Just because AC and Barca did play Champions League, AC did qualify for the knockout rounds, and Newcastle they don't have a congested fixture list. They're not playing 2 games a week, so they obviously can concentrate on the league. Because they don't have a congested fixture list, they have more time for training sessions as well, which to Arsenal's point last season, apparently that was a very big plus for them. They could actually train 2 or 3 times a week, whereas we heard Mikel Arteta say after the Bode game, they couldn't get a training session in before the Leeds game, I think, just because they came they came back Thursday midnight or something, or at 1 o'clock. They need Friday for recovery, and then Saturday they can't train because the day before the game, so they just focus on tactics or whatever, and video tactics. So Newcastle can get 2, 3, 4 training sessions in the week before they actually actual training sessions with the players and the ball and everything before their games. Whereas Barca and AC, they can't. They get maybe 1 game or 1 training session or 2 training sessions, actual training sessions.
Yeah. I agree with that list or your ranking of it, AC Milan coming out of the Champions League group compared to Barca, for me, puts them above Barca, even though Barca are top of La Liga. But if you actually look at who they've played, they still need to play some big games as we come back. I think they've got Atletico as the first game back. And then I think they have Betis a couple of weeks later. And in the one big test that they've had in La Liga, they lost it to Real Madrid. So
and
I know they play.
That's another point. Like the big test that they've had against Barca, against not Barca, against Real Madrid, against Bayern, and against Inter, they've lost all of those games. Except Inter, they drew one of them, but they lost the other one. But like they failed in all of those tests. So and they got. And like against Real and Bayern, they got not the first half against Bayern, but they got their asses handed to them again in those 3 games.
And even the bigger wins that they've had in La Liga against like your Bilbao and your Villarreal, Bilbao inexplicably changed their team for that game and get the floor wiped with them. And Villarreal, we've talked about their injury crisis this season. So, yeah, nothing too impressive in terms of game performances from Barca. But I will say it's impressive that they're top of the league, and it's impressive. Their defensive record is mightily impressive. Even though they've been playing lesser teams, to only concede 5 goals at this stage of the season is pretty unbelievable, to be fair. And particularly with their defensive woes in terms of personnel, injuries, weird team sheets. To have such a good defence is pretty impressive. So I think they still cling on to 9, with Newcastle being in at 10. So I agree with that. Now we've got a lot of teams for the last 5 spots, from 12 to 16. Again, that list includes, for me, just below that is Liverpool, Juve, Leipzig, Inter, Chelsea, Man United, Dortmund. And you could probably put Sociedad in that list as well. But yeah, I think they're the teams with a real shout. The rest, Bilbao would have been there a few weeks ago, but no European competition and a little bit of a blip in form. I think they get left out, even though I think they have some good quality in their team. Atalanta are a little bit the same, a recent blip in form, no European football. You got to ding them. Atletico, do we really need to talk about? They'd probably be bottom of this list because of what they served in the Champions League, but I guess they're still 5th in La Liga, which isn't. They should be doing better. Betis, the little category of Betis, Roma, and Lazio. I think Betis have finished top of their Europa League group, so they're past the playoff round, and they're still clinging on to the same amount of points as Atleti in that race for top 4. Roma are in the playoff round of the Europa League after finishing second in the group. Missing Dybala, so it's hard to judge them because I think he was meant to be their main creative force. And when you watch Roma this season, they've been diabolical. They've been almost unwatchable. We give Tottenham a bad rap, but man, Roma have been pretty terrible. So they're sort of white-knuckled it to this point. And Lazio would be higher, but they got knocked out of the Europa League group, which is kind of ridiculous. So, yeah, I think those teams just miss out on being in the conversation. And the conversation for me revolves around, again, once more, Liverpool, Juve, Leipzig, Inter, Chelsea, Man United, Dortmund, Sociedad.
Well,
so do any of those names jump off the page or jump out of the screen to you?
Well, would you put Liverpool above Tottenham?
Nah, not yet. Just because of that league form.
Yeah, but in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah. Well, it could flip when we come back, and we've been talking about Liverpool's potential to have a very high ceiling when we come back from the World Cup. But so maybe in a month's time after we come back from the World Cup, a month after that, we could be seeing the Liverpool have jumped. But also Tottenham could be coming into their own in terms of that famed, the preseason they did in terms of fitness. Maybe they've been aiming to peak at that time. So maybe they have a little bit of an upturn as well. So yeah, as it stands, I can't put Liverpool. I know, again, Tottenham's group was easy in the Champions League, but they still finished top of it, whereas Liverpool finished second of their group.
Yeah, but equal points
and
second.
Obviously, yeah, equal points second. And they're the only team to beat Napoli. And Liverpool's main case comes down to who they've beaten this season. So obviously lost Arsenal, but beaten City, beaten Newcastle, beaten Tottenham. Lost to United, obviously, but beaten Napoli as well. And Ajax, you can't really throw into this conversation because they're not quite there. But they've beaten all of those teams, so they have a good argument in terms of their high ceiling. And if we're talking about which team you fancy to win a competition like the Champions League, well, then maybe they could be a bit higher on the list. But in terms of what we've seen so far, particularly in the league, I cannot put Liverpool above Tottenham right now.
Well, then you got to put them just below them. Like
so do you think Liverpool are top of those teams that we mentioned below?
Yeah, just because they've had that uptick in form over the past 3 or 4 weeks.
And that high ceiling is always lingering as well. I think I could agree with that. Yeah. And the teams they've beaten, obviously, what we just said. So were there any other names that jump off? Or is Liverpool almost in a tier of their own for you, and then it's the rest? Because let's not forget, United is still above them in the table.
Yeah,
but United are Europa League playoff rather than Champions League round of 16.
Maybe Leipzig and Dortmund are the only two that really are sort of in and around there.
So Dortmund, I think, lose again on the weekend, and I think they're sitting in 5th or 6th in the Bundesliga, which is really awful. But obviously,
they gave City a run, in both their games against City. Especially in the first game, didn't they go up 1-0?
First one. Yeah, the first one at the Etihad, they were very good. The second one was easily their best performance of the season.
Yeah, then the second one was a 0-0, so...
Dead rubber. But yeah, that form in the league is pretty awful. But I guess they did draw with Bayern as well. But both of those games against City and Bayern were at home, and they could only draw. And we've talked about the famed home ground advantage that Dortmund have at the Westfalenstadion. So I don't think they're nailed on to be just below Liverpool, because I think if you look at... So Juve have an opposite argument because they were terrible in the Champions League. At least still stay in the Europa League, so at least they didn't do an Atletico and bow up. But they're now on a run of 6 games without conceding a goal and 6 wins in a row, and all of a sudden they're 3rd in Serie A. How the hell has that happened? And also, we talk about Barca's defense. Juve have only conceded 7 goals all season. So, this is a team I wouldn't have expected to even enter conversations to be on this list, but I think they somewhat have to be taken serious. And this is all... I don't know if the whole run of 6 games was without Vlahovic, but the most recent games have been without Vlahovic. So, they've entered the chat. Inter for getting out of that group stage in the Champions League must be mentioned, although their Serie A form has been very patchy. But I still do think they have a high ceiling in Serie A, potential to maybe even finish second. But I think AC is still, for me, the second best team in Serie A. Chelsea finished top of their Champions League group, but man, they've been awful in the Premier League recently. And I don't need to talk about it anymore because I've been one of Chelsea's biggest criticisers this season. And Sociedad. Sociedad actually have a pretty good argument in terms of finishing above Manchester United in that Europa League group. And I believe they sit in 3rd in La Liga. But in terms of individual quality, their case lessens because I don't think they have tremendous amounts of that. I think there's arguments pro and con each of these teams for being in there. I think my instinct as I look at the names is to put RB Leipzig just below Liverpool. I don't know if you agree with that. They're up to 3rd in the league now. They made it out of their Champions League, and they've got a genuinely... I don't know if I'll go world-class, but he might show us he's world-class at the World Cup, but Christopher Nkunku is just unbelievable. This is 2 seasons of it now, so...
They got a world-class defender as well.
What, Josko Vardiol? Yeah. I haven't seen much of him, but I think he's been big in terms of them getting better results because I was very critical of their defensive midfield at the start of the season. Well, they seem to have shorted up.
I think last year I said that I know he only signed I think last year for Leipzig, but I said that I told you that Liverpool should look at him to partner up with Van Dijk.
He's very young as well,
which
is a
20
big pro.
Or 21, yeah.
Yeah.
And he already looks
So you happy?
like a Rolls Royce defender. Like he's fantastic. But like yeah, put him next to Van Dijk. So this is what you'll do because he's a left-footed centre back. I know we're sort of going off topic here, but you can then put Van Dijk next to Trent, which will then shore up that side, and then put Guardiola next to Robertson. So if Klopp was to get that set up, I think you can say goodbye to the leaky defense, especially on the right hand side on Trent's side.
Yeah, maybe, and also to that point, Liverpool have been without Konate this whole season.
Yeah, that's another one.
Matip is a little less surprising because we got a full. It was more surprising we got a full season out of him last season than it is that he's injured now. But yeah, Konate is one who I think we need back, and he could help that. It would depend on the price for Guardiola as well. If we could get him for a reasonable price, it's definitely a good signing.
Depends how long his contract is, because I think last year he was valued at 90 or 100 mil, but then he just signed for him. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think that one's off the table for a few years.
I don't know, maybe at the end of this season or at the end of next season, who knows?
And I think Liverpool's attention is on another player playing in Germany and Jude Bellingham anyway. So
yeah, that's going to be 100 mil.
Yeah,
minimum,
exactly.
Maybe if not
minimum,
more.
It would seem.
Yeah.
But yeah, are you happy with Leipzig just below Liverpool, or was there another team who?
No, I think just because Juve did so poorly in the Champions League, you have to knock them down for that. Because on paper, you would expect Juve to beat Benfica or finish above Benfica, and then give.
Not this guy.
It's weird though. Like they gave PSG a little bit of a challenge, but they got blown out of the water by Benfica.
Yeah,
which was weird. Like maybe that's just a matchup sort of thing.
Yeah, maybe a matchup sort of thing. Maybe getting up for a bigger what they thought was a bigger occasion, but they should have been more worried about Benfica from the start.
You know how I said just earlier, I think Newcastle beats AC, but AC beat Barca, but then Barca beat Newcastle, in that trio. Maybe it's similar to that, where I know that Juve didn't beat either Benfica or PSG, but the games were more competitive against PSG, maybe because the matchup was just better, because maybe Juve's midfield is actually on par or better than PSG's, whereas Benfica runs a lot more, so they just got overrun in their midfield and their backline.
It annoys me to see it, but Adrien Rabiot is playing quite well. He's a player I've never really liked, but he's playing well. But the main guy in that Juve midfield for me is Locatelli, who I think is really good, really functional, big presence, sort of in that mold of Casemiro, plugs in gaps in the defence. So having him back has been fantastic for Juve. So am I right to understand that Juve would be your next team in 14, just below RB Leipzig, over the likes of Inter, Chelsea, United, Sociedad?
Ooh, just because Juve had that uptick in form in Serie A, and whereas in the league, Chelsea have come down. It's sort of the opposite story. Juve had a crap Champions League campaign, but they've, over the past 4 or 5 weeks, they've upturned it in the league. Whereas Chelsea and I'm not sure how Inter still aren't really performing in the league, are they? But they've had a decent Champions League, especially considering they finished second in that group.
Well, it's funny because Inter recently have beaten Atalanta away, which was a big win. And then they outplay Juve for the first 45 minutes, but lose that game away at Juve. So up and down is Inter, is the way you describe Inter this season for sure.
I don't know, it's a weird one. Oh, and I just remembered after we wrap this up, we'll finish on my idea for the Champions League format that I told you about.
Oh, true. Let's wrap this up quick. Right. I might have an argument that Inter might be the next.
Yeah, I'd put Inter above Juve. And then do you put more weight on Champions League or League? Because then you put Chelsea above Juve as well.
No,
Chelsea had a slightly weaker group.
Here's a funny thing about that, though. Juve might have, not done themselves a favour, but they're now in a competition where they actually could conceivably win it, rather than being in the Champions League, where for me, no chance of winning that. And Chelsea, for me, no chance of winning the Champions League unless they invest heavily in January again. But for me, I don't see Chelsea having any chance of winning the Champions League. Whereas Juve, conceivably could win the Europa League. I know there's good teams in there for sure, but it's very conceivable they could win that competition.
Depends how much weight they put on it. Because because it's Juve, they're still considered a juggernaut, not just of Europe but of Italian football. So you know how there's certain teams that are like just those sort of egotistical teams? They're like, oh, the Europa League's below us. Like Real Madrid, they wouldn't. They do not give a shit about winning the Europa League. That doesn't play anything.
They're never in it.
Huh? Yeah. Well, even if they were in it, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
I feel like they wouldn't even care if they didn't win it. Even though they'd be the favourites for it, they wouldn't even care. And Juve sort of falls in that similar bracket, even though they don't have like 10 or whatever Champions League titles. They still consider themselves that elite or prestigious team, because I think they have the most Italian league titles, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they do. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know whether they would care if they got knocked out of the Europa League.
It also depends on their league position, because it's another avenue into the Champions League, and we've talked about how competitive Serie A is, so they could be embroiled in a top 4 battle as it is. So for the last 2 spots, looking at these names, I'm tempted to go Juve in at 15.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
And, oh man, Chelsea, United, Dortmund, Sociedad for the last spot.
Well, Chelsea and Dortmund have Champions League in there.
But terrible league form. Awful.
Yeah.
See, I would rule United out because I don't think their league form...
Plus they finished second. Plus they finished second in Europa League in a group that they were expected to actually win.
Yeah. And that's why Sociedad have such a good claim, because I think their league form's been a bit better than United, and they finished top of a group with United in it. So it depends on what you value, but I think it knocks United out for sure. So we've got Chelsea, Dortmund, Sociedad. I might go Sociedad.
Just as a surprise package?
Yeah, because if you want to go Champions League, you got Dortmund and Chelsea going through, but terrible league form, and Sociedad for being third in La Liga and through to or past the playoff round of the
They're in the round of 16.
Yeah, they're already into the round of 16 for finishing top of a group with United in it as well, as we keep mentioning. So it's really tight between all those teams, but for the time being, I'm going to give Sociedad their love and put them in at 16th, even though I think their individual quality is not as good as the other teams that we've just listed, but the way they're performing, they deserve some love.
All right, let's give them some love.
And we have, Champions League idea. Let's do this as we wrap up.
So we have nothing else to talk about. We're not going to talk about any other leagues, but we'll wrap up on this idea. And it's a bit of it's an off the cuff idea. You know how you have those. You know when you're sort of in cruise control when you're like washing the dishes or taking a shower or something, and then like your mind just wanders and you have like a random thought. You're like, this could maybe work. So like I can't remember when I thought of it, but I was like, okay, it sort of combines the Champions League that we had in the idea of the Champions League that we had in the COVID season, and also it would address the fixture congestion. And like there would be some plus sides to it and there'd be some minuses to it. So basically my idea is instead of the Champions League being in the, start/middle of the season, like where you have your group stages in August to December, usually it's till December, but because it was all squashed down this season, it finished early. So instead of having the group stages then and having a midweek, and then also then having your knockout stages like from February till April, May, why not have the entire Champions League format right at the end of the season? So have hang on. I'll try to get through the logistics and then you can.
Yeah, no, go on.
Yeah, so basically the league would run from August till let's say start of April maybe. So because I think the leagues generally finish around late April, mid to early May, if I'm not mistaken. So it would finish around April. So it would get rid of a lot of fixture congestion then. Because then in the league, you could possibly play some of the rounds, you could play midweek. And there would be less travel then, because you wouldn't have to travel to, I don't know, you wouldn't have to travel from London to Manchester, which is, I think, a 5 or 6 hour bus ride, if I'm not mistaken, or train ride. So, I don't know, you generally get a little bit wary on that. But, whereas, so instead of doing that, you don't have to then travel from, London to Barcelona, which is, a 2 hour plane ride. Plus, you have to go through check-in and all that other stuff. So it ends up being 5-6 hours. And plus, those tend to take their toll more so than bus rides. Anyway, so the league would be a little bit more condensed. So you'd have then a sort of Euro/World Cup style format to the Champions League. And what you'd do is you'd have, if you can do it two ways. You can keep the format the way it is with, I think, 8 groups of 4. And then each group is designated a country that they play in. So with that, it then would remove one aspect of it that, for instance, if you're Barcelona, you get 3 games at home, and then 3 games away. So if you're a Barcelona fan, there is a chance that your team doesn't actually play at all in Barcelona, because you could play all your games in France, for instance, if France is the host country of your group. So it's still the same format, 2 legs against each team in the group, and then you have your knockout games as well. So you could do 2 games per week for each team. I think I haven't actually had a look. I haven't actually mapped out the fixture list or anything like that. Like I said, it's all off the cuff. And then obviously have your knockout stages. Then you could actually look at doing them in maybe again, you can do them in different cities and stuff. So I guess there would be no home team advantage at all, because you never play in your home country or your home stadium. You might get lucky that you can play in your home stadium, but generally you would play in different countries or whatnot. So just off the cuff, let's open it up for discussion. What do you think about that idea? That it would possibly remove fixture congestion, and it would then be a sort of World Cup / Euro style format of tournament.
I'm good with it, man. I'm in. Obviously, some logistics need to be sorted out, but it sounds very familiar to. Remember when we revisited the Super League? It sounds like everything building up to the end of season, a crescendo of the most important football and the most important matches. And it's not diluted with Carabao Cup games, FA Cup games, league games. It's not diluted with that. We're all focused on one thing, and that's we're all here to try and win a Champions League.
You know what else, though? You know how basically you would also have the most informed teams competing right at the end of the season. So when you actually finish in the top 4, you're actually one of the top 4 best teams in your league, and possibly in the entirety of Europe. Whereas, for instance, with Chelsea, they're in the Champions League, but and Liverpool, they're both floundering in the league, but they're still getting results in the Champions League, but they haven't come into the Champions League in top form or top condition. So with this, you finish your league in April, and then you automatically qualify for the Champions League, which is I guess it would be a club World Cup almost to an extent, or a club Euros. So you'd get the best players, the best teams coming into that tournament, playing straight after winning their league or finishing second in their league and whatnot.
And I got nothing else to add. I like the sound of this. I think it sounds perfect. maybe not perfect. So there's some things that need to be
Yeah.
worked out, and we'll think of them as we go along. This might need like a bigger section than what we've got right now, but that is a fantastic point as well. I struggle to. The only thing, like you say, is we're losing those two-legged ties, which I do love.
No, you get them.
Yeah, but to lose them with a home ground advantage is a little. I don't think if you're not playing home and away, you don't need two legs either. By the way, I think you could do just one.
You can maybe we saw it in the COVID season. Like they played one leg, didn't they? In the knockouts.
Yeah, I tell you what, you could do. If you're still doing a World Cup format with groups and stuff, you could do the group stages in a home location, and then when we get to the knockouts, home and away.
Maybe then do it in the home stadium of each team. Yeah.
Yeah, because the only thing is you don't want to lose the atmosphere that you get in an Anfield or a Maradona Stadium or a Westfalen Stadium.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose that from the Champions League nights. But I love particularly what you said about the form teams getting to play in that competition. And I also love that is the only focus that the footballing world will have. And there's no risk of injury in a league game against bloody Norwich or some crap like that. You're just playing for the biggest trophy in club football, and that is all your focus. And you've come into it having earned that reward in the same season as the season you'll be playing the competition. So as far as when we discuss the Super League, this is about as close as something comes to the Super League. And in fact, it's probably better because it takes less finagling, it takes less readjustment of footballing structure to make this happen. So, yeah, from early, without thinking about it in depth, like you say, an off-the-cuff idea, my early reaction is I'm definitely in for this idea. I think it sounds really fun and really interesting and really good.
The only, I guess, disadvantage to it, like I said, like, if you're Barcelona, you might play because my suggestion was each group gets a home country. So, like, the home countries would obviously be the major ones that can actually, host it. Like, France would then need to host 6 games. So you could play maybe, 2 games in Paris, 2 games in Lyon, and then 2 games in Marseille, for instance. And then, you can do England, Spain, Italy, Germany, etc. The only disadvantage to that would only be that if you're Barcelona, you could play 0 games at home during the group stages. Same goes for any other team. You could play 0 games at home, so you don't get that Anfield, for instance, atmosphere. And then also for the smaller teams like the minnows, so like a Victoria Pilsen, they don't play any games in their country. So for the smaller teams, it really sucks for them. And then also also Maccabi Haifa and teams like that, where I guess it's their only, for their home fans, it's their only chance to see their team go up against a PSG or Real Madrid and Barcelona, Bayern, etc. Unless you actually do a 50-50 allocation or maybe a 40-40 allocation where for instance, if you have Maccabi Haifa versus Victoria Pilsen versus Barca, you're playing that at Stade de France. You do 40% to Pilsen fans, 40% to Barca fans, and then 20% to open up local fans and whatnot. You can maybe do that sort of a ticket allocation. Obviously, that does mean that as a traveling fan, you need to then pay for hotel expenses or whatnot. But from what I've seen, a lot of traveling fans, at least in Europe, they generally do they generally carpool to whatever game that they're going to. But the ticket allocations are obviously 10%. Because I think, for instance, when the Dinamo fans all went to Milan, they all pretty much a lot of them organized a carpool of 6, 7, 8 people in a combi van, and then they just sort of slept in the van overnight and they didn't even pay for accommodation, and then they just traveled back the next morning. So,
nice.
But then doing something like that, going from Croatia to London, you can't get away with that. But going Croatia to Italy, Croatia to Germany, and so on, you can actually do those sort of trips. So yeah, like in some aspects, it sucks, just because the home fans of certain teams miss out. But in a lot of aspects, I think it benefits the players a lot more and the quality of football a lot more. So they are the biggest winners, whereas like the fans that want to watch it live would probably be the biggest losers. But like fans watching it on TV and the players are the biggest winners of this sort of format.
Yeah, I think as we think about more of what it would take for this, and if this enters our minds again, I think we should dedicate a bit longer to it to think about that. Maybe sometime over the World Cup when it gets a little bit more dead.
Yeah.
But yeah,
maybe actually figure out the logistics of it. Like try to figure out. Maybe for instance, we take this year's groups and then we allocate a country to each one, and we try to figure out how we'll do it. Maybe that's a way to do it. But then also like if you look at how fans generally do the Euros or the World Cups, you stay in that country. Like the group stages take 2 weeks, right? So like all the fans right now, they're staying for a minimum of 2 weeks in Qatar, right? So they would stay in these countries then for a minimum of 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, depending on how long it should take to play 6 games, like a 2-legged tie of the group stages.
So also, if you're doing a neutral country, I don't think you need a 2-legged tie.
Yeah, but
I think you can just do World Cup stuff.
What, 3 games, or you make it a bigger group, like maybe do less groups, but then like 6 teams per group or 8 teams per group.
That's a good solution, because you would be worried about over 3 games a really good team just having a little blip and then getting knocked out.
Yeah. Well,
but I mean, that's what can happen in the World Cup. That's what we could see in the coming month.
So what you reckon? Single leg ties for the group stages, but bigger groups. So the top 4. So like instead of 8 groups, you do 4 groups. Top 4 go through, and then
you could probably do 6. 4. No,
because right now it's 8 groups.
Yeah, you'd need to do 4 groups of 8 rather than 8 groups of 4, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, 4. Either 8 groups of 4, like it currently is, or 4 groups of 8, and then the top 4 from each group go through. Yeah,
you could do that.
So
then obviously you need to play 7 games.
Yeah, and then what? And then but then for the knockout stages, it's 2-legged ties.
Yeah, I do still like 2-legged ties.
And that's at the actual home stadium of each team.
Yeah, and then maybe you could bring it full circle and have the final back in that country where you started the group stages.
Well, the thing is, there's 4 countries that you're starting the group stages.
Yeah, true. Well, you could make it like a World Cup thing where you only do 1 host nation.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, how many countries can actually host it? Because like England can do it, Spain can do it, Germany can do it, Italy can do it. There's only
France can
do it. So there's only like what? Is that 5 countries? There's only 5 countries that have the infrastructure that could actually really do it properly.
You could do like joint hosts like they've done for Euros. You could do like Belgium and Netherlands like they did for Euro 2000.
Yeah.
Portugal's hosted a Euros, so they could probably do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's enough options there. Obviously, we had Ukraine and we had Austria,
Poland?
Switzerland, and
Ukraine,
Poland for 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's joint hosting nations as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think they're just things that we need to think about if we touch on this subject again, because I think there's a lot to go into it. But yeah, like I say, my initial reaction is that sounds really good.
Yeah, and this is probably I don't know. I really like this idea because it's almost like a World Cup of club teams, like
yeah.
And it's a month. It'll take a month and a half to get all these games out the way. Because the thing is, with the World Cup, you're obviously not playing 2-legged ties, but with this, you are. So it probably takes like 2 weeks, 3 weeks longer than a World Cup. But yeah, like I reckon it would be super interesting, and it would get rid of. I think it would get rid of a lot of the fixture congestion because it'd be way less travel as well. Yeah, UEFA, hit me up, man. I got it all figured out. Like, there you go.
I love it, man. That's good.
Yeah, well, like I said, it was off the cuff, like sort of just a random thought during the during autopilot phase of doing a random whatever I was doing. I can't remember what I was doing, but yeah, like hopefully anyone who's tuned in, even if they want to just skip to this part, like I'll put in the timestamps to my off the cuff idea for the format. Let us know what you think.
Sure.
Yeah. So
that's good, man.
Caleb, any other mentions or anything? We just I think the World Cup starts on Saturday, isn't it?
It's Saturday, Sunday. It's less than a week. That's all I know.
Look,
So,
and I know we didn't get into the Ronaldo interview, but I guess like look, there's only been like 3 or 4 clips circulating. I think part 1 of the interview is tomorrow, and then part 2 is Thursday. So we will talk about it once we actually watch the full interview. Yeah.
Maybe, because like as it stands, I have zero interest in this story. Ronaldo, in terms of what he can actually do as a footballer right now, compared to the guys we've been talking about for the last 2 hours, is irrelevant. So I don't really care.
And I guess to an extent, like we've sort of talked about, and like Gary Neville's touched on a lot of like what's missing at United and whatnot. And Ronaldo, for instance, he talked about how the infrastructure is exactly the same. And the technology exactly the same as when he left in 2009 or 2010. So like they haven't updated anything. So they've fallen behind in terms of that. And I'm like, yeah, I think to an extent we've talked enough. Unless there's any like major revelations, there's a lot there that we've sort of speculated on anyway throughout.
Anyone with eyes could have seen what we've heard so far anyway.
Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be anything new or major. It'll just be really like the things that we talked about are actually confirmed. How badly the club is being run and etc. But yeah, look, Caleb, it's been a pleasure. We'll reconvene maybe Thursday or Friday. We'll see how we're going.
Late in the week, and we'll shift our attention after putting a bow on what we've seen in the start of the season for the clubs. We'll shift our attention to international football and the pinnacle of the sport, the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah. You know what we're going to do for the next pod? We're going to do a combined Yugoslavia 11 and a combined Scandinavia 11.
All right. And was the Roman Empire? You suggested the Roman Empire?
That's like, you may as well just do like combined Spain. Actually, Germany wasn't really part of the Roman Empire, but France, Italy, etc. So we're not doing that. We could do a UK 11 actually, but there would only be like really 2 or 3 players from, like Robertson gets in, for instance.
Well, you know what we could do?
And
we could make
Bale, but Bale's been I don't know.
I was going to say we could make it that Europe is the only continent that we split up into regions, and then we do the other continents as wholes, and then we could do all-star 11s from each of those.
We can do that maybe in the next one,
but we can do that as the World Cup goes as well. Yeah, we don't have to do it all in one pod because we'll be here for 4 hours.
Yeah, but with this one, like with the Yugoslavia 11, like that could have been a reality. With the Scandinavia one,
of course.
I think that to an extent, I'm familiar with parts of Viking history, but I'm not sure whether they were ever one united sort of empire or country or whatnot. But like the Scandinavia 11 sounds fun, especially since Denmark's pretty good. Norway didn't qualify, but they got Haaland and Ødegaard, so that'd be fun to try and put them into a team. But yeah, we'll figure something out.
Definitely.
Yeah. So to everyone listening, make sure you subscribe and like and comment on what you think about the format that I suggested of the Champions League. And thanks for coming, and bye for now.